I work at Balderdash. Balderdash is a Node.js consulting firm. We built and maintain the sails.js framework, the Waterline ORM, among a bunch of other Node modules. If you want to email me, that's my email address. I'm on GitHub. I'm TJ Webb nearly everywhere on the internet. Somebody else already took it. Or unless in a couple of cases I signed up for an account years ago, forgot my password, and then can't get back in. I'm also the organizer of a co-organizer of Norfolk.js, and I'm from Norfolk, Virginia. We have a JavaScript group that meets every month, much like this. We have speakers come give talks and so forth. Norfolk happens to be a direct flight from Minneapolis. If anybody wants to come down and hang out, especially winter, it's warmer down there. Drop me a line and we can figure out a topic to talk about. We're working on a book, Sails.js in Action. It's a Manning book, and you can get early access to it online. About half the chapters are done. It's going to be released in the spring. That's a resource for you if you want to get more details. Okay, this is a slide to say that I have a few more slides. So this, basically the overview of the talk, the outline of the talk is pretty simple. I'm going to talk briefly about what Sails is and does. I'm going to talk about API-driven development, a quick overview of what that is to me and how we employ it. And then I'm going to code for a little bit and just prototype some things out to give you a sense of how we operate, how Sails facilitates some of the back-end development process. And then we'll talk about questions. Feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. I'm happy to have this be as collaborative as you guys want. Sails is a Node web framework. It's based on Express. So if you already know Express.js, Sails is it's pretty easy to pick up. It's just Express.js with some scaffolding around it. Hooks in with Socket.io and some other things automatically. And it's really good for giving talks on API-driven development. What's up? Can you click allow? Click what? At the top. Oh, make that thing go away? Yeah. Where's my mouse? Okay. Okay. There you go. Okay. Cool. I've had this Mac for like 4 days. I've had a ThinkPad running Ubuntu for like past years and years, so still getting used to the Mac world. Waterline is an ORM layer. It's bundled with Sails, but you can swap it out for other stuff. It functions as a standalone ORM layer. So if you want to interact with a bunch of different databases and don't necessarily want to write SQL and want to have a common interface for all of your persistence layer operations, Waterline is a pretty good solution for Node. Just to be really graphical and brief about this. So Sails isn't going to help you solve any problems that Node doesn't already solve. The goal of Sails.js and Waterline is to make your life easier when working within the Node.js paradigm. So it's not going to be used for building a website for your cat because that's you can use other stuff for that. And it's also not good for building laser-guided missiles because nobody knows how to do that in Node. You're going to be using some crazy technology that hasn't been invented yet. And we try to focus on this middle ground where building practical stuff that people will use and hopefully pay you to build for them. We're going to go over API-driven development really quick. I think this is I've got one more slide. Okay, it works with test-driven development. The reason is because API-driven development is really about prototyping your application out as you go, sort of in an iterative fashion, not trying to architect or design all of your API endpoints or all of your API or all of your functions at the beginning. One of the underlying ideas behind API-driven development is that it's very similar to doing mockups and wireframes as a communication piece on the front end. This is sort of the analog to the back end. And the premise is that you never know what you're going to be building until you build it. If you think you know at the beginning of a project what your project is going to actually look like when you deliver it, you're probably wrong, and that assumption leads to like a lot of expensive mistakes most of the time. It's a good way to like start coding and then having to undo stuff as you go. As you build out your API endpoints and functions in your API, in sort of along with the sales mindset of making your life easier, you can plug it into Swagger, which is a documentation generator, and you can document stuff as you go also. So you can get some quick functionality, some quick tests written, some quick documentation as you build out your backend, and it works pretty well that way. Can work, okay, so it works with a bunch of different ways of developing software. This is a buzzword. And same thing here, so it doesn't confine you to building the backend at the same pace or in the same manner as the front end. You can proceed at different paces depending on the business needs. Okay, so yeah, it can give you some organizational benefits in your development process. This is more buzzwords, and this is important though. So, especially in Node, which is like a great Node is the perfect example of like the Twitterization of software, because everything in Node is like really tiny. Like the whole idea is you work in these tiny modules. A module can be anywhere from like a huge API to like a single function. So you might include a Node module and it's just like one thing. The consequence of that is in Node particularly, most of your software that you'll ever write in Node is just going to be called by their software. The end user who's actually using your software is generally like way down the line, like this distant idea that they're using software that's going to be calling other software that's going to eventually like works its way up the chain to interface with your API. And getting your API prototyped out and developing a pretty solid contract with whatever other application is going to be using it, getting that spec'd out early and quickly is generally valuable. So that's it. Thank you for coming. No, I got some code that I want to run through here. I hope this doesn't fall while I'm typing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through a quick demo of like how I would go about starting some new application in Sales, how it fits in with some of these API-driven development ideas, and you guys can ask me questions as we go. What's up?
Can you zoom?
Yeah, I'll zoom. Zooming is a good idea.
Sorry.
All right, I've even got, wait a second, I can do this better. Is that, well, okay, it's at the bottom. Who could not read that? Who could not hear me? Okay. It's like a keyboard not detected. Press F1 to continue. All right, I'll zoom this one too, because I'm going to be using both of these terminals at one point. Okay, so I've got an empty folder. In Sales, you can generate a new application pretty quickly just by doing this. I'll call it Sales Demo. Okay. These are different font sizes. Okay. Okay, so it generated a folder for me. This is just some basic directory structure that comes with a Sales app. If I do Sales Lift, it will load the app, and it will give me some, spins up a server. It's an Express server in Node. And it just gives you a nice little landing page here. Not this one, although that would be cool. All right, so great. Gives you a nice home page. This is just like your boilerplate basic. You've done nothing yet, but it looks nice, right? So it gives me some hints. So step one, I can generate a REST API. I'll zoom in on this too so you guys can read it. generating a REST API means I'm going to expose an endpoint on my REST server that some other application can access and then interact with the server. So if I actually do this, if I run sails generate API user, what that actually means is I'm going to generate an endpoint for a user model, right? So if I have a domain object called user, which I think in most applications we're probably going to, we can go ahead and create that. So I can just say sails generate API user. OK, that's fun. So let's also say that, let's get interesting. Let's actually say that this is some sort of business application, and the user is going to have some roles that actually like confer permissions on what they're allowed to do, for example. Role. We're now going to have 2 endpoints. This is asking me what sort of migrate setting I want. I'll talk more about that in a minute. I'm selecting 2. And now I can go to Postman. Raise your hand if you use Postman for developing stuff. Awesome. All of you are using Sails already, because Postman is written in Sails. All right. I planned that so well. OK, so what I did here is I just made a, I can't, all right, I'm going to jump. Ready? Get request. All right, I made a get to /user, localhost 1337 /user. It just gave me an empty list back. Just gave me a JSON response, because that's the sort of thing that I'm probably interested in. But there's no user, so it just gave me an empty list. Well, let's create a user real quick. We can create a user just by posting to that. That's kind of small still, isn't it? All right. Mac key combinations. Oh. It's like I've done this before. All right, now we're just going to post to a user. We're going to send it a JSON object. Make sense? So we're just going to do that. And we're going to find where the response is. All right, so I got a response. It's a 201 created, which sounds like the type of response that we want, because I'm creating stuff. It gave me an object back. I sent in the username TJWeb, because that's me. The database generated an ID, and it automatically timestamps the actions for you. You can turn those off if you want. But I find this pretty useful in most cases.
What's the default database? Is it Mongo?
Great question. Let's look at the default database. Notice that I'm adding stuff in there. I didn't set up a database, right? So let's get concrete. By default, Sails includes a local data store that just stores actually your database in a JSON file. This is a feature on purpose. We don't want you to have to choose what database you want as the first decision of your application. That can come later when you actually know what it is that you're actually building, right? Again, the fundamental premise here is that you don't have all the answers up front. And the second you start choosing a particular data store as one of the early decisions in your application development process, that's, again, just a good way to make some expensive mistake that you have to undo later, or even probably worse, that you can't undo and that you're just stuck with some database forever that you actually didn't intend to use in the first place. So like, say you start using Mongo, which like everybody does for some reason, and then you realize that like, oh, I actually needed to like joins and like I need to support transactions, right? So then you have to back out of that somehow. Here, I just have this JSON file. So this is where my stuff is. So this is a list of all the users, and my user's right there. Let's hook it up to a real database. I use Docker for most of my local dev stuff. I've got Postgres running, so that's not, OK. So this is my Docker thing. I've got a Postgres server running on 192, 168, 99, 100. So what we can do is, I'm gonna link this because I don't want to destroy the right Wi-Fi. You can. Waterline is an adapter-based ORM. So there's a bunch of these adapters. One of them happens to be called PostgreSQL adapter. I'm going to install this into my new sales project. Okay. And let's go ahead and set that up. I can go into connections. This is the default connection, local disk. The adapter is called sails disk. It's just an adapter that allows Waterline to connect to that local file and store everything in there. There's also an adapter for Mongo, MySQL, Couch, Cassandra, Postgres, a ton of other databases I haven't heard of, Redis, Orient, anyway, lots of them. Postgres is, at Balderdash we typically use Postgres as a default. It's a default approach. It handles most use cases pretty well. So I'll call this connection Docker Postgres. Let's give it some semantic meaning. And my host was 99,100. Who thinks that's right? It is right.
I think it's right.
You are correct. The port is 32775 because Docker gives everything weird ports. The user was, I think it's just Postgres. Password is, I think it's PG Docker. There's an environment variable somewhere. PG Docker is the password. Don't hack my machine. All right. Bonus points for anybody who can log into this database over Wi-Fi. Actually, better than bonus points. Yeah, go for it. I have a better idea. I'm sort of running out of these, so I apologize if I don't have your size. But I have some sales shirts, if anyone would like one. First person to hack into my laptop gets a shirt. And then I'm calling the FBI.
The guy in the shirt.
Yeah, not me. I'm putting this up. Yeah. Okay, so I think that looks good, right? Docker, Postgres, that's all the stuff. Yeah, makes sense. Host, port, user, password. I think that's all I need. And so now I'm going to go open up this other file called models, which says this is the connection I want to use. By default, it uses local disk DB. And I'm going to use migrate alter. When I set migrate alter, that means that when I fire up sales and it connects to my Postgres database, it's going to alter the schema in such a way that all the tables that I need and all the columns and constraints and whatnot are created for me. You guys didn't tell me that I forgot to actually put the database name in here. Very bad. What actually is the database name? Okay, I created a database called sails.mn, and it's just empty right now. Okay, I'm going to close this. All right. That was from a previous, okay. Cool, so I'm going to do sales lift. Hopefully it connects. So it loaded up. Now I'm going to create my user again. Post. Okay, I got a response. Doesn't have username in it. Wonder why that is. So Sales has a distinction between schemaful and schemaless. databases, Postgres obviously requires a schema. In schema-less databases like Mongo, Couch, and this local JSON store, you don't have to define all the attributes on your models before you can just start inserting stuff, and it'll accommodate that. In Postgres, it needs to know that you're going to have a username column before you actually start shoving data into it. So that's why here, in our response, there's no username here. So let's see what this looks like. Open up the user model. This is what you get by default when you do sails generate API user. It generates this model file for you. And we're going to create a username attribute. And if I can type, say type equals string, because it is. And let's make it unique, because usernames probably should be unique. And we want our user to have, we created role, right? Because we wanted to have roles. So we can hook that up like this. All right. I bet we have a user in here with a null username. That's the one I created earlier. Now I'm going to create one with my actual name. Great. Now zoom in again. All right. So now I created this. This is the same thing we got before, right? Except I didn't assign a role, so now it has no role. Username's TJWeb. But now if we open up Postgres and zoom out, then we get sales in public. All right, so we have two tables. Role and user. Sales created those for me. User has some stuff in there. That's the stuff that I inserted over the REST API, right? So this right here is sort of the essence of the API-driven development concept that I'm trying to get at and just kind of walk through, is that I didn't have to design any of this. I just started throwing data at the server, and it grabbed it and started shoving it in tables, right? That's what I want. I just want a server that I can do stuff with and to, and it just sort of allows me to do that while I figure out what it is that I'm actually supposed to be doing. So let's say we want our user to have, we'll just do one more iteration here. So we don't want our user to have one role, right? Maybe a user is, in the accounting department, but they're also like in the sales department or something, right? Some crazy businessy thing we have to accommodate here. But we didn't know that up front, right? The customer or my boss just said like, the user should have a role or something, right? But they're like, well, actually, it makes more sense if they have multiple roles. So now we have to, set that up. So, okay, we're going to create a role. A role should probably have a name, right? And then the role will have, we're going to set up a many-to-many relationship now, actually. So we're going to say a user has many roles. This is the collection of role. And we're going to set up the reverse relationship also. So users is a collection of user. And the way we link these up in Waterline is we use a via keyword in Waterline to let Waterline know how to link these two models up. So in user, over here on the left, I can say via users. And that just basically says join user on role where this user is in the list of users that role has, right? This isn't straight, you can't write this in straight SQL, right? Because it's a many-to-many. So if you're writing SQL, this is actually be like an inner join and then like a left join, because you have to have a join table in the middle, right? So
Many to go to many.
it's what?
Many to
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Either way, not fun to create manually. So, and this is going to be via roles. Just creating a two-way relationship here. Lift our server again. All right, now we're going to look at the database real quick and refresh it. Now we have this other table here. So setting up relationships, again, I don't even know SQL, right? Or I know SQL, but I don't really want to write it. I'd rather just do this. It creates a join table for me, and now I can start connecting stuff up through my REST interface, and it'll do what it needs to do in the database. Like Rails? Grails? Cruels?
Doesn't look too tasty.
It's yeah, like Sails, right? So Sails tries to strike a balance between, it's like on one hand, it's like hipster magic, right? It's like, hey, just do this and everything will work out. But at the end of the day, you can at any point you can dig into stuff and mess with it if you need to. As a practical matter, these days I don't spend a lot of time looking at the machinery because my job is to get stuff done. I can go home and tinker with stuff if I want to. So if you get to a point where you have 1 million users, you need to start optimizing things and so forth. You can dig as deep as you need to. But again, at phase 1, we're just prototyping some stuff out. We want to show that say like the UI is being built and they need a backend because now they're kind of starting to figure out what they want. You can spin up a backend pretty quickly that does approximately what you need to, and then you can refine along the way. So we started our server back up. And we're going to create a role. Let's create a role called with name admin, because that's my favorite role. I like being admin. I'm going to post that just like I posted the user. I get the response that we're becoming familiar with. It's just a JSON object that says this is the thing you created. And let's add that role to our user. So now we have a little bit longer string here. I'm also going to change this ID. So now our URL path looks like this. Add is a verb. The rest of this stuff is your join path. So /user means I'm going to be operating on a user. /to, that's the primary key. This is just sort of idiomatic, like RESTful interface. Sails takes this approach where you can concatenate the primary key onto your path, and you just directly get the resource that corresponds to that primary key. So user /to, it says, I'm going to be doing some stuff to user /to with ID 2. And then it says, I'm going to add something onto the roles relation, onto that user. This is my object. I'm sending it ID 1 because 1 is the ID of the role I just created a second ago. I'm going to send that in, post that. All right, now I get well, it's kind of cut off, but because my screen is weird. But actually, I'll just, it's just cutting off the updated at date stamp. But now I get a bigger object back. Now I get back the user, except now it has roles attached to it. It has a list of roles. Right now it's just one role. But now the admin user is attached to, the admin role is attached to the user with ID 2. So let me zoom out for a second. Now if I go back to get user, it's like I just want a list of all users. So now I have 2 users. One is, this is the crap user that I created at the very beginning that has no username and no roles. But now there's this one, with TJ Webb with that role attached to it, right? And it's a list of roles. So I can continue adding more roles onto that user in the same way. So all the joins are done for me in the database. If we open up the database, it looks about like what you'd expect.
Out of curiosity, do you also have the route of role /1/users, and you can pass an ID to?
Yep.
That would be the same result.
You can do it either way. So if I do /roll, now each role has the users attached to it. This is all default settings. In some applications, you can imagine that, say I want a list of stuff, but I don't want to do an inner join on all of its fields every time, right? I don't want to pull this giant object graph out of the database. I want to request that stuff like on demand as I need it, right? So by default, it grabs everything. This mechanism in Sails are called blueprints. There are a ton of blueprints configs. You can pretty granularly configure this stuff to behave how you want. So if you don't want to grab this stuff by default, you can turn that off. In the request string itself, you can specify exactly which relations you want to populate. There's a field called populate, and you just say which associations you want to populate. So say a role also has like permissions. You can just specify exactly which relations you want to populate in your request. Because different requests might have different requirements depending on who's calling that endpoint. I'm going to shut down the Sails server. And at this point, I'm really going to hand it over to you guys. I want to see what questions you guys have. Was anybody able to hack into my laptop, or is anybody trying?
You said we couldn't.
Huh?
You said we couldn't.
I said you couldn't as a challenge. And you're supposed to say challenge accepted. That's okay if nobody hacked it. My talk kept working, so I'm fine with that. Yeah, so the join table, it sets up a join situation for you. This is the role table. All this stuff is inserted. I don't have to deal with anything. If you want to turn debugging on in Sails, it'll spit out all the actual SQL it's generating. So if something is not working right, or if you're trying to optimize something, you can look at what SQL it's actually sending to the database. So all that stuff is visible if you want it to be.
So did it dynamically change your role table to being a string to an array of strings?
So in this case, the array of data that comes back, the role table schema actually didn't change. All it has is those fields, and user is the same, just has username. So when I get back that array of roles or an array of users, depending on how I request, that's really a function of it going through this join table to figure out how role and user are connected up. It generates some columns here. So ID really isn't important, but role users, user roles, that just says which user is connected to which role and vice versa. So if I had a user with 5 roles, there'd be 5 rows in this table. So this is the typical sort of join table you have to have in a many-to-many association situation in a traditional relational database. You join through this other table to be able to go have arrays on both sides. Questions?
Switched from the role as a property on user to it being this relationship. Was there a migration that could happen there?
Yes. So if we looked at, I didn't want to keep coming back to the database too often, but really what happened is when there was a one-to-many, when user had only one role, there was a role column here. There was just a foreign key into the role table directly.
Does it move the data over too? If I had a role, like a single role, and then we made it many, is that all that data can get moved into the join table?
So by default, with the alter migration, if you have a one-to-many that turns into a many-to-many, it backs up your table into RAM, which is a sort of a limitation. So you have a giant table, it will take a while. But it backs up your table, drops the table, recreates the table into the schema that it needs, and then reinserts everything. So in this case, if you go from a one-to-many to many-to-many, then you can do that. If you go in the reverse, it'll dump your data out and be like, I don't know how you want me to connect this up, right? Because Some things only go one direction. But in the migrations that can go in that direction, Sails will back up the data and reinsert it for you. Question?
If I'm hearing you right, these migrations are kind of automatic.
Yes, I configured them to be automatic by setting the migrate setting in the models config earlier. So, right, so when I did this, if I go back to here, where it says migrate alter down here, this is one of the migration settings. There are other migration settings, including safe, which is typically what you want to do in production. In production, I don't like having software messing with my data because it's production data, especially if the system is running while I'm upgrading stuff. There's also create, which will only do additive changes. It won't actually, if there are any possibilities for data destruction, it will not do those migrations, and it will give you a warning in the console when you load Sails, because it'll be like, hey, I'm not going to drop this table because you migrate settings create. Alter is probably the most destructive one. It's the one that says, it's for development mode. It's like I'm going to totally reconfigure the database, just do it all for me. So there are a few different migration settings, but in this case, it does all of that automatically. Yeah, so alter add, alter is essentially, if you think of other frameworks, it's essentially an alter add. It will alter a table, and it will also add new columns or constraints onto it. Yeah.
So it would never delete anything?
It will, if it needs to delete something, it will fail. It'll just bail out, and it'll be like, hey, I can't migrate this automatically. Yeah. Question? Testing. So at Balderdash, we use Mocha. It's pretty straightforward once you start getting these REST endpoints set up. And again, there are a bunch of different directions I could go here, but testing just wasn't one that I had time for. But there are two ways to test. One, we like using Postman to just prototype stuff and get a sense of what the responses look like. Once we have these REST endpoints set up, we like using Supertest inside of Mocha. You can really easily start sending data to these REST endpoints and get a sense of whether they work. So it's a good kind of balance between a full integration test and a unit test. So you spin up the server and you can just start hitting stuff. And in that way, you can also it's also a good way to unit test with different databases, because when you spin up Sails in your testing environment, you can pick what configuration it uses. So if you want to test on Postgres versus other databases, for example, you can do that and see how things go. And you can also do that for benchmarking too. If you want to see, hey, I know I'm going to be using these particular methods in my application. I want to see which database is faster, right? Just as a quick benchmark. So.
Can you talk a little bit about controllers?
Controllers, sure. We can go into that. Sure, okay. Yes. You can definitely do that. So I'll answer that, and then I'll touch on controllers for a second. So in Waterline, if I go back to here, this one connection here, I'm saying I want to use this connection for all models. But if you want, I can go over here and I can override per model, and I would say, oh, this one is in, Docker Postgres, but possibly this other one, is in some other database. So you can set the connection property on a per model basis if you have different models that you want to store in different places. And one thing Waterline can actually do is it can do cross-adapter joins through node. So if you have some stuff in Mongo and some other stuff in wherever, you basically set up a join by designating one of the databases to hold the join table, and then it uses that to join everything across adapters. Controllers. So in Sails, right now I'm using, everything I'm doing is default, out of the box Sails blueprints. where it's generating REST endpoints based on the models I'm creating. So I'm starting in my model layer, I'm creating domain objects, and it's reflecting my ORM up onto the web service that's then publishing these REST endpoints. If I want to override or change or add any of those, when I did Sails generate API, user, and role, it created controllers also that are also empty. By default, each of these controllers has create, read, update, and delete endpoints. It also has add and remove for manipulating associations. But in here, I can create controller actions that are actually just bound into the application as express middleware. So if I want to do some custom action, if you know Express, this is going to look really familiar. You just deal with the request and the response however you want. So this is just another, it's an Express route handler. It's as if you had Express and you define your route and you, so in this case, this is inside user controller. So when I create this function, by default in Blueprints, when I load up my app, I'm now going to have an endpoint called /user/custom action. It's going to generate endpoints for all of your controller actions by default. So again, it just allows you to avoid doing a lot of that plumbing and wiring manually. You just get to write code.
So is Sails purely for API development, or can you also render templates?
The talk I'm giving here is on API-driven development. Sails can do a lot of stuff, which I couldn't possibly cover here. Sails does do, can serve as a full integrated MVC framework. So you can go all the way from databases all the way to the view layer. It supports all the typical templating engines. Pick your favorite one, Handlebars, EJS, React, if you want to do isomorphic rendering, Mustache, Jekyll. There's a ton of them that it supports. A comprehensive list is in the documentation. But you can, I didn't create the views folder. Oh, I did, actually. Views folder is here. So if you go in here, the default rendering engine is EJS. And so it just comes with some boilerplate stuff. But you can swap that out with whatever you want to do. Typically at Balderdash, when we're building things, a lot of the time we will start with the API first and have the UI is kind of being built in parallel, where the UI is more of the customer conversation piece. It's the language that we use to interact with the customer and figure out if we're building what they want, and then we kind of hook that up to the back end later. So when we develop full applications, we typically have the server and the client as separate projects. But that's just our approach. It's not right or wrong. It's just how it fits into with our typical process. Question?
Can you speak at all to what you've seen as far as Sails has had for adoption, like any adoption rates?
Yeah. So we were having this discussion. I was in Atlanta on Monday, and I gave a similar talk, and we were having this discussion there because with NPM and GitHub, it's really hard to really put your finger on a precise number of users. We've had over 1 million downloads since it was released. We have about 60,000 a month on NPM. We understand that a lot of that is continuous integration, but Sails is pretty far upstream in terms of the dependency tree. So you typically don't have Sails as a dependency of a dependency. It's usually installed globally on a machine. So we have a lot of users. Our issue tracker is really active. We have about 12,000 something stars on GitHub. We're the 5th or 6th most popular framework on all of GitHub, and the 2nd most popular behind Meteor. If you count Express, then we're also behind that. But we aim for a different kind of development process as Express, and Express is as a dependency of us. So.
Community plugin creation.
Yeah, so Sails is extended through a concept called hooks. It's your ability to write essentially Sails plugins that modify the behavior of the framework or augment behavior of the framework. and those are swimming around. There's stuff for authentication with Passport.js, permissioning, kind of template, boilerplate like CRM and CMS type applications with a bunch of like models already prefabbed for you. Bunch of generators. So if you have a bunch of apps that look the same and you want to have the same directory structure, you can pre-generate different flavors of sales app. So there's a lot of different options there. Sales is used by a bunch of large corporations. So even though Walmart published Happy, they do have a lot of usage in sales internally in Walmart Labs. We know that Microsoft uses them, IBM, a lot of big companies have teams running on sales. Fidelity, just JetBlue, just to name a couple more. There are a bunch floating around there. So sales, the usage is pretty strong, and it's regularly one of the top Node frameworks. So if you want to dive in, you'll definitely have support available from the community.
Because of the name, it's pretty easy to compare Sails with Rails. Do you think that that's a fair comparison?
Yeah, I mean, it is eponymous of Rails for that reason. The philosophy is slightly different. The goals are similar. The goal is to make your life easier and do stuff faster. Sails is quite a bit less opinionated than Rails, and we don't try to be as prescriptive. We try to give you freedom when you need it, but provide scaffolding where it's necessary and where it's helpful. But if you want to go off the rails and do whatever you want, that's just a sort of use at your own risk type thing. We don't make that impossible. It's just it's your preference. Yeah. Question?
What you just said, does that make this something that will last longer, or is it something that's going to be easily replaced in terms of development?
Replaced by what, like a competitor or
Yeah, a new system.
a new system? We don't. That's hard to say. The Node.js ecosystem is gangbusters right now. So a lot of this is it's a pretty solid framework. We have a lot of large users. We have a large number of users, and we get to ride the coattails of the popularity of Node itself. So in that sense, I would say that betting on Sails, as with any other Node framework, you're betting on the ecosystem of Node itself. So the longevity and robustness of Sails are inextricably linked to that of Node. I'm happy to bet on Node personally. In our business,
Seems like a safe bet.
we have a lot of production applications on Node. We have a lot of users on the applications that we built in Node. And now seeing a lot of these larger corporate enterprises adopting Node and trying to adopt Node, like in our view, and with the optics we have with some of our clients, the adoption rate of Node is limited nearly exclusively by the amount of talent that these companies can hire. So, like if you go into like some large company that's trying to convert stuff to Node, they're gonna be like, okay, well we have 1,000 Java developers right now. If we want to switch to Node, we have to hire 1,000 Node developers. Well, you can't, because there are not 1,000 Node developers on the market probably. So the liquidity of the labor market is really the limiting factor at this point. And a lot of these large companies also are investing a lot of money in training, so retraining their existing people to kind of think in the Node mindset. And that's really a lot of the limit right now. Node is kind of graduated beyond the convince your boss problem in a lot of cases. It's a pretty mature platform, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's technically superior than a lot of the other traditional platforms in all the ways that we're familiar with and keep hearing. So, yeah, we're betting on Node, and that's about my case for it.
Sounds good to me, thanks.
Other questions?
Question here. You said you're using Swagger for your API.
Yes.
How you see you have validation in models. Is that somehow tied to Swagger's validation system?
So we use Swagger mostly for generating documentation at the moment. We don't really use it in reverse, where you can build a Swagger document or a Swagger specification and then like hydrate that into an application. I can show you a quick example. So say we wanted to like, let's just convert this. So where's my, okay, so again, I'm going to link this module so I don't have to destroy the Wi-Fi. So if I install this and if I redo sales lift, this is the module, the add-on module that we use. And if I just crack open, it generates a Swagger specification for the app I just made. So, okay, it's kind of huge because Swagger has a lot of stuff, but okay, yeah. So like these are all the tons of endpoints. So like if I do role/find, I can get it. And then here's another there's another challenge coming up for the astute observer. This is our Swagger generation page. This is just a default project that we hook up to it. This is actually the sales permissions module, these docs. So if I put in this URL, all right, it says can't read from server. It may not have the appropriate access control origin settings. Anybody know what that is? Hint, so when I put in this URL, the browser is making the request to this URL that I type in. I need to configure cores on my server here. Sales has a cores module that's built in. So I need to enable cores so that I can make cross-origin requests. I need to open up my routes, config, this is just an example of some of the stuff you can configure in Sales. So my Swagger doc endpoint needs to enable my cores settings. Hope it works now. Yep. So, okay, I'll expand a couple of these just to, okay, so user. This is all the stuff you can do on user by default. It's a lot of routes. You can, again, you can disable these as you want. Typically, when we are developing stuff at Balderdash, we'll start out with like just enabling all these blueprints, and then we'll circumscribe the API more and more so that by the time we get to production, the surface area of the API is as narrow as it can be while supporting all the necessary functionality. So for example, get user/ID, that's one of the things that I talked about earlier. And we can try it out. I should have just done my demo on this instead of Postman. So ID2 had some stuff, right? Try it out. Yeah, so there's my user. This is the response from localhost in the Swagger docs. So you TJ Web, admin, right? We already saw all that. I'll zoom in case not everybody can see it. So Swagger is pretty cool. Swagger not only generates documentation, but it generates this test usage interface as well that you can use to start trying out stuff. It's again another way to assist in the prototyping process. Did that touch on your question, or is that you have any other? Okay. Do you have a question back there also?
Yeah, I was curious from I think you might have answered it when you were talking about it, but I got a little confused on when you were talking I want to add a user, why is that not just a post, why is it user add? But I think it was maybe just roles that was add. Can you explain why you use the add
Yeah.
verbiage for the API rather than just a standard post?
Sure. So the add is there because in that case I'm indicating that I'm adding a relation onto another object. So that request looked like Right. Yes. So for example, another way to do this is I could actually just post it there. So if I do this, user 1 is, yeah. Yeah, so /add is just again, it's semantic, it's like syntax sugar for making the route a little bit more descriptive. I can just post it here. I could also, instead of posting to user 1 roles, I could actually just put on user /1 with a role in my object. So I could say, now I'm creating a user. I'm saying an update command to user /1. So I don't need this. Now I could just do this and send it some. Yeah, there we go. It's a list. The ID of the role was 1, I think. Yeah. You can do a put command too. All those work in the way you'd expect. Other questions? Right here.
Back to Swagger. Does Sails provide an easy way to segregate your actual database from the database that gets hit through the docs?
The actual database. So for
In other words, I don't want somebody adding a user to my actual database, but I'd like them to be able to exercise
to play with it.
this API.
Yeah, I mean it's nodes. You can just spin up multiple instances of your app, right? You could run it on a different port or something.
Can you have them share the same definition for your?
Oh yeah. So one thing we actually really like doing is we like building sales apps that we include from other sales apps. And so another thing we like doing is building a sales application that has all your database connections and all your ORM, and then having other sales applications just require that so that we can have a bunch of applications that share the same ORM but have different web-facing functionality. We like using that pattern for microservices. So if we want to have a happy style microservice architecture where we want to have one ORM definition but a bunch of different web services hosted on either different machines or possible different hosts for whatever sort of thing you're trying to achieve, either load balancing, distribution of load, or something like what you're talking about where we want to have the same configuration but have different sub-configurations with different applications. That's a way to do that. Me explaining it probably doesn't sound very simple, but it's pretty straightforward to create a sales application and just include that in another one. And it'll mix in all of its configs and other things. Other questions? There's one more over here. Maybe not. Sure. Optimistic locking. Yeah, so whatever the data store you choose, whatever type of locking mechanism it uses will be the default. So that's going to be implemented, for the most part, at the database level, that's going to be implemented by the waterline adapters. If you want to implement an application layer locking mechanism, then you could do that in Sails, just using putting that logic in the middleware. And was there another part to that question? Yeah. Yeah, not out of the box. That's something you could build yourself, but it wouldn't be too difficult. You could either use the timestamps, for the updated and created at dates as a proxy for versioning. You could use a version to data store like CouchDB that maintains versions of all the documents you insert it into it naturally. There's a few different ways to do that, but it's not supported out of the box at the moment. It'd be a good add-on to add in. There might be one out there, but we haven't used one. Other questions? What's up?
Is there a Dockerfile that you prescribe for doing sales apps, or do you roll your own?
Yeah, there's no Dockerfile. I mean, it runs on a pretty vanilla Node environment, so all you really just need is Node. Everything else is up to you. So there's not a lot of like infrastructure you really need to set up. It'll just run on any Node box. It'll run on Linux, Windows, Mac, and I think Docker is probably good for if you want to set up databases. A pretty typical deployment infrastructure for us is Redis for session sharing and socket sharing. So for Socket.io, if we have a distributed cluster, we use Redis for sharing the Socket.io sockets as well as the sessions. Postgres for the persistence layer, and we have some horizontally scaling Node web service. So like Heroku is a good example of that, but they don't use Docker. Yeah, actually, I think I searched on this Docker thing. I think I found a couple sales options. Like if I do sales, so like there's a ton of Docker images already that involve sales to some degree. That these people have all set up their own sales environments in Docker, and I don't have a strong opinion on. Yeah, we don't have an official one, and there's not really one that I have a strong preference for. So.
I have a question. Have you ever done a project using Sails and at the end you guys decided maybe Sails wasn't the right thing to do for the project? And what's the
I mean, I've had the opposite occur, but I don't think so. Have I ever regretted using Sails at the end of something?
maybe not regretted it, but
Or like, was there some better? Well, I mean, in some cases where we're building some enterprise thing, and again, this goes back to my slide with the cat and the predator drone. Like, I've thought at the end of the project, well, we should have just used Java or something, right? Because like, well, we're using JDBC or something, right? So in cases like that, I think you might look back, or you might be better served maybe to use a different language for some use cases. In cases where Node, for example, in the enterprise, Node doesn't have great enterprise extension support yet. Or if you need to like work with an Oracle database, the Oracle driver is like 9 months old. So in those cases, you might be kicking yourself like, I just like should have used .NET or Java for some of that stuff. But who knows what you'd be doing in 5 years when like nobody's using some Java jar anymore, right? Because it's been rebuilt in Node. So I've had those sorts of thoughts, but I haven't, for stuff that Node is good at, Sails is at least as good. So and that's basically the pattern that we've found for all of our projects. Question?
Do you have any performance metrics for how much overhead Sails puts
We do.
on top of the Express?
Yeah, they're on GitHub. I don't know if I could find them right now, but I can give you a quick rundown. Sails is about 3 to 4% slower than Express, just bare metal Express. So it's over Express, it's very small amount of overhead. That's really the benchmark that we use. So as long as we're like within a few percent, 10% really of the performance of Express, then that's great for us. I mean, my goal when I'm deploying something is I just want to know that, can I make it faster by throwing more hardware at it? And that's really where I'm coming from when I'm making some of these performance decisions in Sails, or if we're deciding what optimizations to pull in. We're hesitant to introduce complexity in order to benefit performance by some small margin. As long as we're within 10% or so of the performance of raw Express, that's pretty good. And Sails offers a lot for that small amount of overhead. So, no, go for it.
You say Sails is slower, so why would you use Sails over Express?
If you value your machine's time more than your own, then you should not use Sails. I personally, I run a consulting firm, and we all have jobs where we're like expected to do stuff and like impress our bosses or whoever, and like my job is to make people more productive.
So in other words, sales should eventually be able to compile down into Express.
It's right now it really is Express, just with a bunch of middleware included. You can pare down sales to be basically what raw Express is by you can manually. There's about 16 or so hooks, sales hooks, the plugin system that I mentioned. Core hooks that are included with sales. One of those is the view templating engine. There's Socket.io. There's the blueprints generator. There's a bunch of that stuff that you can remove if you want. For example, we've set up very bare metal sales installations to serve as RabbitMQ nodes. So we have some sales application fronting, as a web server front, and there's a RabbitMQ adapter for Waterline. So we actually we like to use, we can send through our REST endpoints, instead of being persisted into some table, it's sent out as a RabbitMQ message. And that can be picked up by other nodes, other node listener apps, and we just build those in Sales and just disabled a bunch of, you can disable the HTTP hook, which won't even load Express at all, but you can do a bunch of other stuff. So it's pretty, you can configure a lot of stuff, yeah. Other questions? What's up?
What about the Websockets support? Any cool stuff you can do with that?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The Websockets support?
Yeah.
Any cool stuff you can do with that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of WebSocket support out of the box. You can, the big sort of headline feature is that you can subscribe to model events. So in your browser, you can say whenever some model of whatever type is created, added, deleted, updated, if a relation is added to it, all that stuff, I want to be notified. So the browser can essentially be a listener on database events via Sales and Socket.io. That's what we like using it for that. Sort of back to the RabbitMQ thing, we've built one of our clients, we built a large distributed user messaging system, basically like a chat room / private messaging thing, sort of like Slack, I guess, using RabbitMQ on the back end and Socket.io on the front end. So you immediately get, basically it's Socket.io through Sales directly to RabbitMQ, and we get all Rabbit messages end up turning into messages on the browser through the Sales WebSocket support. So it's pretty cool. It does all the things that you would expect Socket.io to do. Subscribing to stuff and getting updates on server-side events quickly. So, by the way, all this stuff that I'm talking about, you can find on the website, sails.js. Can I type? Yeah, sails.js.org. That's our squid. Question?
I believe version 11 is the stable release right now, and they're running 12. Is there anything major in 12?
So yeah, the current stable release is 0.11.2. 0.11 has been out for a while. We patched it up to 0.11.2 to support Node 4. So all the latest Node 4s are supported by Sales. Sails.12 is currently in release candidate stage. It should be getting released soon. I'm on master right now, right? So yeah, when you saw my version, it's 0.12.3 dash something. A couple updates in .12 are it makes it easier to extend certain types of functionality. So it makes it easier to mix in controllers and services from other Sales applications. ES6 support is better, and we're gonna basically it's been in RC for a while. We're debating whether to try to upgrade to Express 4 also. There's a giant pull request right now with Express 4 support, which increases performance a little bit, and allows us to upgrade some of our dependencies. It's to be determined. It depends on how much breakage we have to deal with Express 4. We might wait till 1.0 to upgrade to Express 4, depending on compatibility concerns. Yeah, we've always been hesitant to commit to a schedule, not because we're flaky, but because other things that we depend on are always changing. So we try not to release versions on a time schedule that's not actually based on like any sort of other like more meaningful reality than calendar time. When if Node 4 comes out, for example, right, release patch releases. Some security patches are in Express 4, but not 3. So that's why we're trying to move to Express 4. So things like that.
You thought about just skipping Express 4 and include Express 5?
Yeah, and well, so once we get to 4, the biggest jump in API delta is between 3 and 4. 4 and 5 are much more similar than 4 and 3. So the upgrade will be easier once we just get to 4. At this point, it's like Sails, I mean, it's Node, so it seems kind of like new and fancy, but Sails has been around since 2012. We have a pretty established user base, and so the project is at a sort of mature-ish stage where breakage is not on the menu. Like we don't want to break people's stuff. We want to always have a smooth upgrade path, so that if you start using Sails now or started using it a year and a half ago, there's not some crazy leap you have to make to get to the new version. Building in those polyfills and making sure the documentation is good for those upgrades are higher priority than like just making sure we can plus the version number somewhere. So Express 5, will be hopefully added shortly after Express 4, because I think it'll be an easier upgrade. There's a project called Strappy that actually is Sails based on Koa, which is pretty cool. There's also another project called Dogwater that is Waterline plus Happy. So there's a bunch of different like mix and match you can do with if you have some other preference for underlying routing system. Other questions? Is that it? I have shirts up here. I do not have enough for everyone because there are a lot more of you than our number of shirts that I could fit in my carry-on luggage. Randall is going to determine some totally fair way to give them out.
Do you have a number generator?
Yeah, do I have this? Someone build a random number generator for Sails.
No, for Meetup.
For Meetup, actually, at Norfolk.js, we have a random number generator that we use we randomly select someone from the RSVP list because we hand out books and stuff. But no, I don't.
Is that one here?
I don't have it on me, unfortunately. But I think I'm done unless there are more questions. Anybody? All right. Thanks.